If you haven't already, check out Inside Out and Inside Out 2. To cut to the chase, they're both really good movies. I'm a Pixar fan in general, have been since the beginning. I didn't enjoy all their movies, but this is definitely one of these. Well, both of them are among the strongest. Let me turn the fan off. I'm not sure if that's showing up on the mic. The second one, of course, was released theatrically in 3D, and then I didn't see any 3D showtimes for the week after, but they ended up having 3D showtimes that week as well, and now I'm seeing 3D showtimes going into the fourth week, which is pretty unusual. So if you're fortunate enough to have extended showtimes like that and you haven't seen it in 3D yet, then by all means go out and catch it. Unfortunately, my local theater, which is preferred due to their quality of projection and seating, and unfortunately they don't show animated kids movies generally, so in 3D. So had to travel to a less desirable, to say the least, theater to see it. But at least it was on one of the relatively better screens. Now the first one was, when it came to home media, it was towards the end of 3D's heyday in the US. In 2015 we got this Blu-ray 3D. When they used to have lenticular slipcovers, they would call it Ultimate Collector's Edition. And when 3D left the US on Blu-ray, for Disney that is, Ultimate Collector's Edition started referring to the 4K pack, which we know is a lie. 2D is a step backward, and many of them are upscaled anyway. But anyway, we got this beautiful thing. It's got, besides being 3D, it's also a lenticular flip. So it changes pictures and is 3D at the same time. This also includes the short film Riley's First Date. This would come between Inside Out 1 and 2. Sadly, this was not made in 3D. But it includes the short film Lava. And coincidentally, that's also one of my favorite short films from Pixar. And it's a great song. A very catchy song, timeless story. And speaking of story, how is the story of Inside Out? Well, it's a story about Riley. She's a little girl, and you see these emotions at the control panel in her head. And it follows as she moves from her small town to a new city, and her distress in the various situations. And while through an adult's eyes, her reactions to these things may seem unfounded and overblown, of course, through a kid's eyes, that'll be much more severe. And in that sense, it doesn't make it any less real. And you see her emotions personified by a small cast of characters: joy, sadness, fear, anger, disgust. But it isn't just about emotions. The way the story is told, it's about all kinds of psychological aspects and aspects of the brain that are touched on, such as abstract thought, imagination, love, skill, perception, dreams, short-term, long-term, core memories, which has become sort of a meme in speech in recent times, likely due to this film, and even the role of sleep in consolidating all of these. It all starts out with one simple emotion of joy, pressing a single round glowing button the moment Riley sees her parents, and it's followed shortly by sadness, which causes whimpering, which causes her parents to respond to her needs. And this is a seemingly small moment that becomes more meaningful to the story later on. And as the story goes on, as Riley grows, the control panel becomes more complex. But it's not just artsy and serious. It's able to have really great humor built in, not in a way that's sidetracking or just inserting some random crude humor to distract you. It's actually built into the story, and it's just plain funny. Like the whole extended idea, the concept of the dream studios while Riley is dreaming at night, it's made to resemble Hollywood in many ways. And the concept of having movie posters be for common dreams that many people have, like I'm falling, And there was a whole brief sequence about in her dad's brain of putting his foot down, taken very literally. And you also got to see these same emotions, their own versions, in other people as well. But what's interesting is that while they have these characters with personalities, they're really just a representation of Riley herself. Like sometimes when they refer to Riley or things that are hers or relatives, or they'll refer in general to it being theirs in a sense. The words they choose kind of blur the lines between Riley and themselves, like they're the same person in a sense. So although you've got this big fantasy universe with its own residents, laws, locations, and physics, it's really all allegory for what is happening to Riley. And therefore, the internal fantasy could never take precedence over the external reality. And I'll tell you what I mean. Like, for instance, when Riley's imaginary friend was introduced, the first time I saw it, I knew pretty much there's no way he can survive. There was no way that certain random things could happen, like dropping important core memories into the pit, just leaving Riley with amnesia all of a sudden. Something like that wasn't going to happen. One was dictating the other, not the other way around. In other words, the fantasy elements were restricted to follow the path of what human nature is in general, and they were symbolic of that above all else. The fact that joy and sadness were the ones who got lost from headquarters wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just a means to create a buddy road trip comedy. It was because they were the polar emotions that Riley was lacking in her situation. Because depression can lead to not only loss of joy, but loss of expressing grief, an emotional middle ground, disinterest, which was symbolized such as when the islands of her personality, her interest, her identity, some of them crash, like for instance Hockey Island, Goofball Island. It also can lead to disattachment, like her Family Island, and honesty. And then if left unchecked, can lead to not behaving like yourself or not thinking clearly, behaving rashly, like when she decided to run away. And again, going back to these emotions really being Riley herself, it's funny to notice, like when Riley is younger, when she's a baby being fed, you see these emotions expressing her thoughts in explicit words, which is inherently humorous. Like when she's being fed broccoli, disgust saying, "That's not brightly colored or shaped like a dinosaur." And then anger taking the controls when she's upset about being fed it. And then when they do the airplane motion for feeding, that just completely distracts them all. And they're like, "Oh, airplane, we got an airplane, everybody. Ooh." And little things you might not notice the first time around, just little seemingly throwaway lines that are meaningful in fleshing out this world of psychology they're living in. Like when they drop these crates on the train, they say, "Oh no, these facts and opinions look so similar." And can't we all relate to that? And as for the 3D, it's of course the best way to watch it, obviously. For one thing, the characters being not based on any real living things, they got to get creative with them. And they're not just simple bright colors. When you get up close, which the movie often does, you see that they're made out of these particular matter that's like glowing and in a state of flux. And it's, of course, beautiful in high definition, but 3D gives that extra depth to it. So even without having super strong 3D or pop-outs, that just really adds to the beauty of the whole thing. When you get these close-ups of the characters' faces, even close-ups in cramped quarters between characters was a great experience, because it's like putting you in that little confined space. The library of memories from the top, I didn't even notice the first time around, but I noticed this time that from the top, the library shelves were made to resemble the pattern of the human brain. And then you've got the orbs with the memories playing back in themselves, and it works kind of like a touchscreen where you can swipe to fast forward and rewind. And it even shows Joy being able to use it like a projector and almost step into that 3D memory. And the placement of this in the stereo window just looks awesome. And stick around for the end credits, because it's basically like a little ViewMaster reel where you've got the little squares on the side of the screen with images in them. And then you can go see Inside Out 2 if you haven't already. This follows Riley into her teenage years, and facing a little crisis about with her friends, venturing into the subtleties of human relationships. And as noted before, the control panel gets more complex as she gets older, and this is true again, signified by a work crew coming in while she's going through puberty and overhauling the place. The place is in chaos, and new emotions are introduced. I was wondering at first how this would work. It seemed questionable if this wouldn't feel forced, but it really did work. They were well written, followed a good path from beginning to end, and were really essential to the story, and the foremost among them being anxiety, but they all played a important role. And it also followed the same rules, basically, as the first movie, of them not just being random characters with their own open-ended story, but really being allegory for Riley's course of action and her current emotions. And if you're wondering about these emotions being present in others, yeah, they kind of retconned that into to address that question very briefly, and had anxiety show up in Riley's mom and said, okay, I'll go back now, and then it went back into the background. And the puns continue. Like we had the train of thought in the first movie and so many other things. We had abstract thought, which coincidentally also made a nice 3D sequence. In this movie, we also got unusual animation like that worked in with the 3D animation, like in Riley's Secrets, that she still liked a TV show from her childhood but wouldn't tell anybody. So we got a traditionally animated character incorporated with the 3D. And you got these real psychological concepts incorporated into other puns, like the sarcasm. That was a very funny scene. We had the Dream Studios in the first one. This one, we had a little more troubling concept, which was basically anxiety while you're trying to fall asleep. When you can't stop thinking about what's bothering you and you're tossing and turning, that was made more real. And that was actually more of like a dramatic scene. And what's nice about both these movies is that they're super well written, great rewatch value, great emotional value. I got wet around the eyes with both of them. And they don't reach for a ridiculous runtime, because you can tell a great story that's concise. Sometimes, especially in more recent years, it's the weaker movies that compensate with a longer runtime that's completely unnecessary. And even movies that are aimed towards kids being longer than they really need to be. And sometimes a story can be stronger if you take out more. And that was the case with these movies. Well under 2 hours each. The first was an hour and 35 minutes. The second one, not much longer, I believe. And the only bad news is that this probably won't be coming to Blu-ray 3D, as has been Pixar's standard since after the pandemic. Onward made it to Blu-ray 3D, but that was kind of already in the pipeline, likely, because that was briefly in theaters, then pulled from theaters, and the Blu-ray was probably already made, but then they just stopped making Blu-ray 3D during the pandemic, and Pixar never brought it back. Pixar movies have been seen on a Russian streaming service, and a couple of them have been ripped. Not in the greatest quality, but better than nothing. And could make it to the Apple Vision Pro, we don't know. So anyway, probably won't get to complete your collection unless it comes to AVP and somebody finds a way to rip movies from that. If it stays afloat long enough. Who knows? That's another story. Anyway, see you next time.